Next question.
I was going to ask also about dietary supplements, and I had two questions. One, Dr. Xavier, you referred to fish oil, and I think you said that it made the immune system more active. And I'm wondering, for a person who has autoimmune disorders, where their immune system is perhaps overly active, would it be contraindicated to have fish oil?
There's no data that it's so. What we know about fish oil is it works through this receptor called GP110, and it activates the good. So in the immune system, there are cells that are good, so they downregulate the immune response, and that there are cells that respond appropriately and tell you that there is danger in the vicinity. What fish oil does is it helps to downregulate the immune system. So, if there is benefit in autoimmune disease, it's only going to help bring down that rheostat for immune response.
Okay, and thank you. And Dr. Scheffler, I thought perhaps I misunderstood that you made reference to some research being done with probiotics in a population and seeing outcomes. And I was wondering if you could speak more about that.
So there have been a number of studies and some recent meta-analyses to try to shed some light on whether or not there is a clear benefit, and this would be in the context of pediatric food allergy or atopic dermatitis in particular. And they've been, I have to say, disappointing, those meta-analyses. So I agree with Ramnik, eat good food at this point. I think short-term post-antibiotic use, and there's some interest right now in the pediatric GI community about the potential for early infant allergic colitis and whether or not there may be a benefit. And those studies, I think, it's premature to say.
Next question.
Some of my questions were already answered about the probiotics, because what I was going to ask is when you talked about the different microbes and how each person has their own kind of genetic profile of microbes, that my understanding about probiotics is that there's all different ones, that some people might need certain, be deficient in certain areas versus others, and whether there's been any studies to see what someone might need versus another person based on that genetic profile of the microbes being different per person. And then also, as far as the antibiotics, once someone's had the antibiotics and it takes 3 weeks after the first time having the antibiotics to get that microbiotic flora back intact, and then 6 weeks after the second time, and then after the next time longer, then has there been any study about having people take a probiotic after they've finished their antibiotic to help the body start to rebuild faster that good flora or the microbe flora that was theirs to begin with but has been depleted in also helping kill off an infection? And then the last part of my question is with the study about the farms. There's been a lot of discussion about have we brought on food allergies ourselves by using antibacterial soap and by not allowing the children to get good dirt, in a sense, as far as playing and having some germs build their immune system, that if they're constantly having their hands disinfected, then is that increasing their risk for allergies? So I apologize for giving a bunch of things, but it's kind of connected in the sense that we want to maintain the good microbes in our body and have our immune system stay strong. So has there been studies in those areas that I mentioned to help that?
So as I said, I am for identifying better probiotics. One of the challenges with probiotics is that right now, the probiotic industry, nothing against them, they basically have been built on very minimal understanding of the microbes, the microbial products, and how they influence the immune system. So the most common probiotics tend to give you a component of a bacterial species called lactobacillus that basically helps to shift the bad microbiome. The problem is that when people have looked at, so if you take 3 tablets of probiotics and then look at your microbiome on a daily basis for 7 days, you can detect the difference or the impact of the probiotics for about 3 days. And then you revert back to the previous microbiome. So the challenge with probiotics has been the inability to sustain the microbial shift. Now, there are better probiotics that are being designed that could deliver. So I alluded to something called short-chain fatty acids. So these are good products that the bacteria make that generally promote health. And whenever you take antibiotics, the first set of bacteria that are killed off are the bacteria that make short-chain fatty acids. So there is a shift now to sort of deliver the microbial products in the form that it acts as probiotics. Obviously, there are some challenges. So if you take short-chain fatty acids, it's not going to make it to the colon through your acid barrier in the stomach. So you have to now begin to put this in pill form and various forms so that it allows controlled release at the site where you need its benefit. Now, your second question about antibiotics and then why not take probiotics to shift the balance? Well, if antibiotics are not indicated, it's best to avoid them. If they are indicated, there have been some small studies that have shown benefit in children who suffer from immunodeficiency disease, who have, there is an indication to use antibiotics to treat a bacterial infection. And in them, there's been some data that suggests that giving them a probiotic after their antibiotic treatment helps them recover faster. It doesn't prevent, the damage that antibiotics have brought on. And then your third question was related to
farms. Yeah.
farms.
So, there's a lot of effort by that group and others to try to identify, the relevant factors in the farm, so that it's, very unlikely to be as simple, for example, as using hand sanitizer. And one piece of data that's interesting in that regard and suggests that, what some of the relevant exposure may be, the children who've living in the suburban homes who have encroached in those farming areas, who drink, unpasteurized milk, not that I'm advocating drinking unpasteurized milk, actually have an intermediate risk for development of allergic disease between the suburban kids not drinking that and the farm kids. So, the nature of the exposures, whether or not it's impacting the microbiome, which is now being looked at, sort of remain to be defined.
The antibiotic soap versus regular soap, is there any difference as far as for allergies?
So I know of one group actually here at the School of Public Health that's looking at a specific agent that's used in a lot of the sanitizers and sometimes in toothpaste, et cetera, called triclosan. And they think they see some epidemiologic links maybe to increased allergies, but I think it's pretty preliminary. And I don't know off the top of my head of any other studies, specifically looking at hand sanitizers and in relation to allergic disease, but.
Okay, thank you.
I think one of the points of great importance for us to understand where modern biology and modern medicine is going is exemplified by the last series of questions, and that is when you're dealing with extremely complex activities, we have had a tendency over generations to try to simplify and to look at some homogeneous approach. There's a famous quote by Albert Einstein that says, things should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I think we're living in an era now. If you remember the diagram that Dr. Xavier showed you with 123 individuals looking at the distribution of their microbiome, there was 123 fingerprints, literally, or stool prints, if you want to call it that. To the extent that we push this kind of personalized medicine approach, we're going to need to stratify the phenotype. That is not the entire readout of these complex problems, at the level of the immune system, at the level of metabolites, et cetera, to begin to parse and get better answers to the kinds of questions that we just heard. Another question?
Yes. Sorry, I think I have a clarifying question first. So if allergies are a immune response and you have an event that disrupts your biome, what is the connection between that event and the immune response? Meaning, like, doesn't your system form like antibodies when it detects something foreign, and that's why you have an immune response? So I'm confused.
So to reword the question a little bit, you characterized an immune response. You characterized the accentuation of that response upon repeated stimulation. And what is the relationship between that and either the changing microbiome or the contribution of the microbiome to that?
How about if I let you tackle sort of the homeostasis in the gut related to microbiome and why you may or may not become sensitized to anything at all, and just briefly make the point that one distinction about the allergic response, at least most of what we're talking about, is it's a qualitative distinction. So you're making a specific kind of immune response characterized by IgE antibody and other things that is pathological. So it's not that all immune response is necessarily bad, right? But that this qualitatively distinct form of immune response. Now that said, food allergy is thought, in the grander scheme, to represent a form of a break in immune tolerance to food proteins, and there's where the microbiome is more likely to.
Yeah, so one of the challenges is to sort of track these events in the gut. So, when you get, so for example, when you take an antibiotic or there is an allergen that induces sort of a transient response in the gut barrier, exposing the immune cells. So Dr. Ausiello mentioned that the gut is the largest immune organ in the body. So it has the largest number of T cells, it has the largest number of antibody-producing cells, neutrophils, eosinophils, and all the cell types. The general response of the gut is to heal. So you can traumatize your gut as many times as you want, it continues to heal. Mm-hmm. It's just that repeated injury is that, then tips the balance so that the good physiological immune response becomes pathological. So even with allergens, your first dose introduces a certain response. You come back with the same allergen, the response is amplified. And we see this a lot in the gut.